What's up guys, welcome back. Today is versioning. So in this video, we will discuss what is versioning and why we do it, and then we will have a simple way to implement it. So your boss comes in and says, we want a new feature. We want to support weather data, and it's going to have temperature. But we will probably expand upon this feature in the future. So you implement the feature, you test it, you deploy to production, and the users are happy. 3 months later, the boss comes and says, this was so successful, we want more data. So now we're going to include a weather description in addition to the temperature. But we already designed everything to handle only the temperature. If we add stuff, we could break everything. So this is where versioning comes in. Our version 1 was just the temperature, our version 2 was temperature and weather description. So when we update our table to add a new column, all of the rows will have null in them. They'll have no weather description. Depending on our requirements, this may be inappropriate, so we will need to update them upon retrieval to bring them up to version 2. So basically how this works is when we get data from the database, we're going to check to see if the data was on version 1. If yes, we're going to give a dummy value to the data, bringing it up to the new standard. And then of course we also have to resave it back to the database. And just FYI, this is just a drop-dead simple implementation. My work actually uses more complicated Java tools like custom interfaces and annotations, but the idea is the exact same. Okay, let's get started. Okay, making our way over to our project, I have a simple REST controller with a single endpoint, a get mapping for weather. And here's my weather entity. It has an ID, a temperature, and a version. Eventually, we're going to add weather description, but for now, that is commented out. And my query handler simply goes to the repository, finds all of them, and just returns the most recent one, for simplicity's sake. And if we look at our database, we just have 3 entries, and they're all on version 1. And when we ping it, we get the most recent one. Okay, so now at this point, the boss comes back 3 months later and says, we're going to add weather description. So you go ahead, you uncomment this line of code, and when you check in your database, you now have a new column, and everything is null. And when you ping it, you get the weather description, but the weather description is null, and we've decided that this is an inappropriate state. So in our query handler, we're just going to add some logic. So we're going to say if weather.getVersion is equal to 1, we'll go ahead and bring it up to the latest version, which includes a description. So for now, we're just going to say unknown, and then we're going to set the version. Now it's version 2. And then we need to save that back to the database, and then return it to the user. So now when we ping it, we get our weather description of unknown. Pretty simple, right? One last thing to consider is that if you have more than 2 versions and you're updating them, you never want to jump from version 1 all the way to version 3. You want to bring version 1 up to version 2, and then bring version 2 up to version 3. That way it's nice and consistent. And just FYI, there are other ways to manage versioning. Sometimes you'll just create a new endpoint. So for example, perhaps your first endpoint literally has /v1 and your second endpoint is now v2, and they return different responses. So depending on the requirements of your business, you might want to handle it in this way. Okay, that's all I have for today's video.